Today we'll be using 3 units in My Grammar Lab and page 62 of your focus book to talk about using modal verbs to make speculation or making guesses about the present and the past. Let's start with the word can to understand the general usage of modal verbs. As you can see in the very short dialogue here, when they mention the ability to do something, they say can use for the present and was able to for the past. Since you're no stranger to modal verbs, we'll just quickly go over the characteristics and different forms. Modal verbs are not like action verbs. Instead, they are used to show the level of possibility, necessity, or certainty of the action verbs that they describe. Modal verbs are also used to ask for permission or give advice. Whenever we say modal verbs, we mean these ones. They are different from action verbs, and the way we use them is also different. Let's take a look at the positive examples here. Whenever we use modal verbs, as you can see, the verb after them always stay in the base form. Therefore, we always say you must leave and never say you must left. Also, the modal verbs always stay in the same form no matter who the subject is. Therefore, we always say she should go instead of she shoulds go. The negative and question forms are listed there for you. Now, something you might forget about modal verbs is they do not have the infinitive or ing forms, which means when you want to use them with verbs that have to be followed by a to infinitive or gerund form, you have to write them like here. I want to be able to play the guitar. I love being able to stay up late. They also do not have the past tense or ing forms. Therefore, when you want to show time when you're using modal verbs, you have to change the verb in the sentence, the main verb in the sentence. That means the verb that the modal verbs are describing. For example, they can't be waiting would be the ing form, and they can't have used would be the perfect form. We'll look more into this later on when we talk about past speculation. And finally, you can also form the passive form. Just put the modal verb before be, as you always do when you use passive forms. The modal verb can is the most common word we use to describe ability and possibility. But before getting into its form, there's something interesting about how it is pronounced. To be specific, it is the pronunciation of the contracted negative form. CAN' is pronounced as can't in American English, but it is pronounced as can't in most varieties of British English. I personally prefer the latter because it sounds clearer when I speak faster. Now back to the form. The word can takes a different form when we use it to talk about the present, the past, and the future. Let's start with the present. We know how we usually use the word can, but there are some changes we can still make. For example, if you want to emphasize that this action requires some effort, or that there are difficulties when doing this thing, we would use be able to. When you say be able to, the word able reminds people of ability. Therefore, when we use this, we're emphasizing on the ability required to get things done. Also, since we're talking about the present, if you say, I can see, I can hear, usually we see it as a description for the present, not that I can see as a general fact but that I can see something now. Basically, the word can is used for things that are generally possible. When we talk about future ability or possibility, the form is a little bit different. The most common one and the most certain one that we use is be able to, simply because it's the only one that can be paired with the word will. Either you will be able to visit or I won't be able to eat. If you want to mention a possibility that is unlikely, we use the word could. If you say we could give up, means it's possible, but I don't think I will. Finally, if you want to use it in the second conditional, the one that we've talked about before, the one that uses the word would for the result, we normally say you would be able to join. Now when we talk about the past, we usually just use the past form of the word can, that is, could or couldn't. Or we use the past form of be able to, that would be was or were able to. And once again, if you want to emphasize on your ability to get something done, about something done in the past that is not so easy, again, you would choose was or were able to over could or couldn't, because the word able simply reminds people of ability. And finally, if something was really difficult, we would use the word managed to. If you have to manage in order to get things done, it sounds like it gets more work. It needs more work, more complicated, and therefore we understand that the process is more difficult. Aside from talking about ability and possibility in the general sense, we also use modal verbs to make guesses. And we do that more often than you think. In the conversation here, the lady makes 2 guesses already in the very few sentences that she's spoken. Can't be and might be represent 2 different levels of certainty. Do you know which is which? If you have to make a guess about something, it means you don't have the answer, or at least there is some level of uncertainty. Because if you are completely certain about something, you don't have to use modal verbs. You just have to use the present simple tense to talk about facts. Therefore, the key to using modal verbs in making guesses is to understand the different levels of certainty each of the modal verbs represent. Let's start with the 2 extremes. If you are very confident about your guess, you might say, it must be the battery. Although you are using the word must, you are not stating a rule, you are not giving an answer, you are simply showing confidence in your guess. On the other hand, if you say it can't be the battery, you are saying you believe it is highly unlikely that the battery is the problem. Now things aren't always so extreme. So if you are making a guess but you are not that confident, you may use may, might, or could. What's convenient about this is these 3 modal verbs represent a similar level of certainty. So we won't say one is more certain than the other. But do notice, if you're even less sure about your guess, and you want to use the negative form, you may only use may not or might not. When we want to talk about the future, you will notice that the rules are similar. It's only that if you have an especially strong feeling that your guess is correct, that you are very confident about it, you may use should or shouldn't. So to learn these modal verbs, You may try to rank them from the most certain guess using must to the less certain ones may, might, or could, to the least certain one can't be. Just like we have different tenses to talk about the present, past, and future, when we want to make guesses, we don't only make it for the present and the future. It's just that when we want to use modal verbs to make guesses about the past, it is so complicated that it needs a separate chapter for itself. Although we say it's complicated to make guesses about the past, we actually just have to make a small change to what we've learned in the previous chapter. The change is, we have to use the perfect form of modal verbs, which looks like this. It is the modal verb plus have and a past participle. In other words, it is the modal verb plus something that looks like the present perfect tense. It's only that when we use the present perfect tense, we have to agree with the subject, so we might say has eaten or have eaten. But since the verb after a modal verb always stays the same, we will always only say must have eaten and never ever say must has eaten. When you want to use the continuous form of the modal verb, it is again similar to the present perfect tense. Now, once you've understood how the perfect form of a modal verb is formed, as you can see from the examples of the positive, negative, and question forms, we can move on to making guesses. If you look at these notes, you will notice that the ranking in terms of certainty of all the modal verbs are still the same. It's just that now we can use the past tense of can't, that is couldn't, to represent something that is very unlikely. And also, we can still use should to make guesses about things we expect to happen in the past. Once you know you are making guesses about the past, just remember to add the present perfect form after the modal verb. Then you know you are describing your guesses for something in the past. I understand it could be quite confusing to learn about making guesses about the present and the past across 3 units in your grammar book. Therefore, let's sum it up with page 62 of your focus book. What you should take away from today's lesson is, we can use modal verbs to make guesses about things, and the form is different when we talk about the present and the past. If you are very sure about your guess, for the present you say it must be something. For the past, it must have been. If you're less certain, but you still think it's possible, for the present you say it might be, or may be, or could be. For the past, it might have been. And finally, if you are very sure something isn't true, for the present, you say it can't be. For the past, it can't have been. Let's wrap it up with exercise 7 on page 62 of your focus book. Question 2. Traffic makes you worry about missing a train. It's reasonable and it's about the present. So you may choose from might miss, may miss, or could miss. Question 3. Someone's not at home. They left already, it's in the past, and you're very sure they're not at home. So they must have gone away for the weekend. Question 4. You can't find Joe, so you know that she left, it's in the past, but you can't be sure whether she's gone home or went somewhere else. So might have gone, could have gone, may have gone, all acceptable. Question 5. The plane just landed 10 minutes ago, so of course Bill is still trying to get his bags. So Bill must still be. Finally, to say something is so unbelievable, a very common way to say it is, you can't be serious. And that's our answer.